A coach cut off a black boy's dreadlocks in front of the entire team, humiliating him before everyone. But soon he realized whose son he was humiliating, leading to unexpected consequences. Subscribe and post in the comments where you're watching from. The day dawned gray and overcast as 12-year-old Jamal tightened his backpack strap across his shoulder. He stood outside his new school for the first time, the unfamiliar building towering before him like a maze of brick and glass. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Excitement and anxiety tangled together as he prepared to step into this new chapter of his life. Only a month ago, Jamal and his mom had packed up their lives in the bustling city to move to this quiet town. She had accepted a job offer she couldn't turn down, and his dad had promised to join them later. But for now, it was just him and his mom, alone in a place where they didn't know a single soul. Jamal's dad was a well-respected figure back in their hometown, heavily involved in activism and often speaking out for the rights of marginalized communities. Jamal admired his father's work and shared many of his values, but right now, none of that mattered. His only goal was to fit in, to blend into this new school without causing any ripples. Taking a deep breath, Jamal checked his reflection in the school's glass doors. His face stared back at him, a mix of determination and nervousness, framed by the neat rows of braids that he had chosen to keep even here. His hair was more than just a style, it was a part of his identity, his culture, and he was proud of it. But as he stood there, he wondered if it would make him stand out too much. That morning his mom had reassured him, her voice firm yet gentle. "Don't let anyone make you feel like you have to change yourself to fit in, Jamal. Be who you are. Those who matter will see you for who you are inside." He smiled slightly at the memory of her words, repeating them to himself as he pushed open the doors and stepped inside. The hallways buzzed with noise, lockers slamming, kids whispering to their friends, others tapping on their phones. Jamal felt a few eyes linger on him, prickling his skin. He kept his gaze forward, pretending not to notice, but he could hear the whispers. "Who's the new kid? Why does his hair look like that?" Ignoring the comments, he made his way to his first class. The teacher, Mrs. Carter, looked up as he entered. Her smile was tight and perfunctory. She scanned him from head to toe, her gaze lingering a beat too long on his braids before she gestured toward an empty seat near the back. Jamal sat down, feeling the weight of curious stares pressing down on him. His mind raced, wondering what they were thinking, but he kept his head up as the teacher droned on, trying his best to focus. His thoughts drifted. Back home, his school had been a diverse mix of kids from all backgrounds, where braids, afros, and different cultures blended together naturally. Here, he felt like a single, stark brushstroke on a blank canvas. At lunch, he hesitated before heading to the cafeteria, wondering if he'd end up sitting alone. Fortunately, he spotted two kids who seemed friendly, a girl with a bright smile named Leah and a boy with glasses named Carl. They were chatting at a table by the window. As soon as Leah noticed him looking around, she waved him over. "Hey, new kid, come sit with us," she called, patting the seat next to her. Relieved, Jamal slid into the seat, offering a shy smile. They chatted easily, Leah and Carl asking him questions about his old school, his hobbies, and his interests. They seemed genuinely interested in getting to know him, and for the first time that day, he felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could find his place here. But their conversation was interrupted by a group of boys sitting at a nearby table. They snickered, pointing at Jamal's braids and muttering to each other. One of them, a tall boy with a sneer, spoke just loud enough for Jamal to hear. "What's with the braids? Looks like he's trying to get attention." Jamal clenched his fists under the table, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Leah shot the boy a glare but tried to diffuse the tension, turning back to Jamal. "Don't mind them," she whispered. "They're just ignorant." Jamal nodded, but the comment gnawed at him. It wasn't the first time he had heard something like that since he arrived. By the end of the day, he was exhausted, His nerves were frayed from the constant stares and whispers, but he refused to let it show. He wouldn't let them make him feel ashamed of who he was. That night he lay in bed, his thoughts racing. He missed his old school, the comfort of his friends, the teachers who didn't make assumptions based on his appearance. He wondered how long it would take before he stopped feeling like an outsider. He recalled his mother's words again, "Be who you are, Jamal." Holding on to that thought, he closed his eyes, hoping that somehow he would find the strength to stay true to himself in a place that seemed determined to make him doubt. Jamal answered their questions about his old school, his hobbies, and his interests. Leah and Carl seemed genuinely interested in him, and for the first time since arriving, he felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could find a place for himself here. But just as he was starting to relax, their conversation was interrupted. A group of kids at a nearby table snickered, pointing at Jamal's braids while whispering to each other. One of them, a tall boy with a sneer on his face, spoke loud enough for Jamal to hear. "What's with the braids? Looks like he's trying to get attention," the boy sneered. Jamal clenched his fists under the table, a flush of embarrassment creeping up his cheeks. Leah shot the boy a sharp glare, but chose to focus on Jamal instead, trying to diffuse the tension. "Don't mind them," she whispered. "They're just ignorant." Jamal nodded, but the comment stuck with him. It wasn't the first time he'd heard things like that since he arrived. By the end of the day, he was exhausted. The constant stares, the whispers, the subtle jabs, it all wore on him. His nerves were frayed, but he refused to let it show. He wouldn't let them make him feel ashamed of who he was. That night he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as his thoughts raced. He missed the comfort of his old school, the place where he had friends who accepted him without question and teachers who didn't make assumptions about him just because of how he looked. He wondered how long he'd be able to hold out. Every glance, every whisper, every backhanded remark chipped away at his confidence, little by little. The next morning, Jamal steeled himself for another day. His mom, as always, greeted him with a warm smile. "You got this," she encouraged, brushing her hand over his braids. Jamal nodded, pushing aside the feelings of doubt and insecurity that had haunted him all night. "Today will be better," he told himself. "Today I'll find a way to fit in, no matter what." But the moment he stepped into homeroom, the teacher introduced him, again, to the class, as if to reinforce his status as the new kid. He felt all eyes on him as he took his seat. He kept his gaze forward, refusing to react, but the tension in the air was undeniable. Every hallway, every glance, every whispered comment, it all served as a reminder that he was different. Then came gym class, and with it, his introduction to Coach Harris. Coach Harris was an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, and known for being strict. As Jamal joined the rest of the students, he could already feel the coach's critical gaze sizing him up, and just as he expected, the man's eyes immediately landed on his braids. Jamal could sense the judgment in his expression, a mixture of disapproval and something deeper, something that made Jamal's stomach tighten with unease. "All right, listen up," Coach Harris barked. "Here in my class, we follow strict rules and maintain a certain standard. That includes how you present yourselves." His words hung in the air, though Jamal knew they were directed more at him than anyone else. Jamal swallowed hard, feeling a pit form in his stomach, but he kept his face neutral. The coach continued, his gaze still locked on Jamal. "Tomorrow, I expect everyone to come looking professional and ready. No distractions. Understood?" A murmur of agreement spread through the students, and Jamal nodded along with the rest. But he already knew what distractions meant. The coach was talking about his hair. A part of him wanted to speak up, to challenge the implication that his braids, his culture, were somehow unprofessional or inappropriate, but he held back. He wasn't sure what reaction he would get, and he wasn't ready for another battle. After gym, Leah and Carl caught up with him in the hallway. "Don't let him get to you," Leah said, her voice firm but gentle. "Coach Harris has a reputation. He's hard on everyone." Jamal tried to believe her words, but deep down, he knew this was different. The stares, the whispers, the judgmental looks, they weren't directed at everyone. They were directed at him, and he didn't know how long he could keep pretending it didn't bother him. As the day ended, Jamal walked home, replaying the events in his mind. He wrestled with a mixture of anger, frustration, and sadness. He didn't want to change. He didn't want to abandon something that was so much a part of him. Yet he could feel the pressure building, an unspoken demand to conform. That night, as he lay in bed, his mother's words echoed in his mind. "Be who you are, Jamal. Those who matter will see you for who you are inside." He held on to that thought like a lifeline, hoping that somehow he could find the strength to stay true to himself in a place that seemed determined to make him doubt. As Jamal lay awake in bed, his mother's words echoed in his mind. "Don't let anyone make you feel like you have to change yourself to fit in." He held on to that thought, letting it soothe the unease that had been gnawing at him all day. He hoped that somehow he could find the strength to stay true to himself in a place that seemed determined to make him doubt. The second day of school was only slightly easier. Jamal walked into the building with a renewed sense of determination, but the same stares followed him as he passed through the crowded hallways. He ignored them, repeating his mom's words in his mind like a mantra, finding comfort in the reminder to stay true to himself. Still, he knew it would be a tough day. After all, today would bring his first real practice with the school's basketball team. Basketball had always been his escape, his joy. Back at his old school, the court was where he felt most himself, where he could lose himself in the rhythm of the game. He had been looking forward to joining the team here, hoping that once he started playing, the other students would see him for who he really was. Not just as the new kid with braids. By the time practice rolled around that afternoon, Jamal was ready. He arrived early at the gym, lacing up his sneakers and warming up with a few easy shots to loosen his muscles. A few of his teammates arrived soon after, chatting quietly among themselves, occasionally throwing glances his way. Jamal noticed, but tried not to dwell on it. Maybe this is just how things are with new teammates, he thought. Maybe they'll warm up to me once I prove myself on the court. Then Coach Harris entered the gym. There was an instant shift in the atmosphere. Coach Harris had an aura that demanded attention. He was tall and powerfully built, with a gruff expression and a voice that could command a room without effort. His reputation for being strict and old school had preceded him. Even before meeting him, Jamal had heard whispers from classmates about how tough he was. As soon as the coach's eyes landed on him, the temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. Jamal felt his gaze lingering, scrutinizing him from head to toe before settling on his braids. A faint, almost imperceptible scowl crossed the coach's face, but it was enough to make Jamal tense up. "All right, everyone," Coach Harris barked, clapping his hands together. "Let's get started. Today's practice is all about discipline. We don't mess around on my court. If you're here to work hard, to prove yourself. I don't tolerate slackers or distractions." He paused, his gaze fixed on Jamal as if the word distractions was meant solely for him. Jamal shifted uncomfortably but kept his face impassive, determined not to show any sign of intimidation. As practice began, Jamal focused on the drills, pouring all his energy into each sprint, each layup, each pass. He wanted to show Coach Harris and his teammates that he was serious, that he was there to give his best. And for a while, he managed to tune everything else out, letting the rhythm of the game take over. But no matter how hard he tried, it seemed like Coach Harris was watching him more critically than anyone else. Every missed shot, every slight hesitation was met with a barked correction or a pointed comment. "Focus, Jamal. You think those fancy braids are going to help you make that shot?" Coach Harris shouted after one particularly difficult drill. Some of the other boys snickered. Jamal felt a flush of anger rise to his cheeks but kept it in check. He wasn't about to let the coach get a reaction out of him. As practice went on, Coach Harris's comments became more frequent, more biting. Every little mistake Jamal made seemed to trigger another harsh remark, as if the coach was waiting for him to fail. "Are you even paying attention, or are you too busy worrying about your hair?" he snapped at one point, loud enough for the entire gym to hear. The words stung. They cut through Jamal's concentration like a knife. He could feel his teammates' eyes on him, some looking uncomfortable, others smirking. He wanted to fire back, to defend himself, but he bit his tongue, forcing himself to keep calm. Standing up to Coach Harris wouldn't do him any good, he told himself. It would only make things worse. By the time practice ended, Jamal was exhausted. Not just from the physical demands of the drills, but from the emotional toll of enduring the constant scrutiny. He had been singled out. There was no denying it. And no matter how much he tried to push past it, he knew deep down that this wasn't just about basketball. It was about who he was. After practice, Jamal lingered for a moment, catching his breath near the locker room. Leah and Carl were waiting for him outside, their faces filled with concern. "That was rough, man," Carl said, shaking his head. "Coach really seems to have it out for you." Jamal shrugged, trying to act like it didn't bother him. "It's nothing. He's just strict." "Strict?" Leah scoffed. "More like biased. I've never heard him talk to anyone else like that." Jamal wanted to brush it off, to convince himself that Leah was just being overprotective. But deep down, he knew she was right. Coach Harris's tone, his choice of words, the way he seemed to single Jamal out, it wasn't just about discipline. It was personal. But what could he do about it? He was just a student, and Coach Harris was an authority figure, one that the school clearly respected. Standing up to him felt impossible. As he walked home that evening, the weight of the day pressed down on him like a heavy fog. His mind raced, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. He didn't want to change. He didn't want to abandon something that was so much a part of him. Yet he could feel the pressure building, an unspoken demand to conform. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mother's words echoed once more. "Be who you are, Jamal. Those who matter will see you for who you are inside." He held on to that thought, gripping it tightly like a lifeline, because he knew sooner or later he would have to make a choice. Coach's constant critiques weighed heavily on Jamal. As he left the gym, Leah and Carl caught up with him, their faces filled with concern. "That was rough, man," Carl said, giving him a sympathetic look. "Coach really seems to have it out for you." Jamal shrugged, trying to act nonchalant. "It's nothing. He's just strict." "Strict? More like biased," Leah muttered, crossing her arms. "I've never heard him talk to anyone else like that. It's like he's picking on you specifically." Jamal tried to brush it off, but Leah's words struck a chord. Deep down, he knew she was right. Coach Harris's tone, his choice of words, the way he seemed to single Jamal out, it wasn't just strictness. There was something else, something personal underlying the coach's behavior. But what could he do about it? He was just a student, and Coach Harris was an authority figure respected by the school. Standing up to him felt impossible. The next day, as Jamal prepared for practice, he steeled himself, telling himself that he wouldn't let Coach Harris's comments get to him. But as soon as he entered the gym, the same pattern began. Coach's gaze zeroed in on him immediately, his expression hard and cold. The drills were tougher that day, and as the minutes dragged on, Jamal's frustration built. Coach Harris's taunts grew sharper, each one a little more pointed than the last. At one point, during a sprint drill, Jamal stumbled, catching his foot on the edge of the court. He quickly regained his balance, but Coach Harris was on him in an instant. "You think you're something special with those braids, huh?" Coach sneered, his voice low and scornful. "Well, let me tell you something, kid. On my court, you're nothing but another player, and I don't tolerate distractions." Jamal's heart pounded, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. For a split second he considered speaking up, But the anger in Coach Harris's eyes stopped him. He felt trapped, humiliated, knowing that no matter what he said, it wouldn't change the coach's mind. After practice, Leia and Carl were waiting for him outside, their expressions a mixture of anger and sympathy. "Jamal, you can't let him keep talking to you like that," Leia said, her voice fierce. "It's not right. He's crossing the line." Jamal sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "What can I do? He's the coach. If I say anything, he'll just make it worse." Carl frowned, glancing back toward the gym. "Maybe we could, I don't know, tell someone, like the principal or something?" Jamal shook his head. I don't want to make a big deal out of it. I just want to play basketball, you know? I didn't ask for all this attention." Leia put a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone, Jamal. If he keeps treating you like this, we'll figure something out. We've got your back." Their support meant a lot, but it didn't change the sinking feeling in Jamal's gut. No matter what he did, Coach Harris seemed determined to tear him down, to make him feel like he didn't belong. And Jamal didn't know how much longer he could endure it. That night, as he lay in bed, he replayed Coach Harris's words over and over, each taunt digging deeper into his mind. He wanted to ignore them, to brush them off, but they clung to him, a constant reminder that he was different, that he didn't fit the mold of what Coach Harris thought a player should be. Jamal tried to keep his head down as the days passed, hoping to avoid drawing any more attention. But no matter how hard he tried, Coach Harris always found a reason to criticize him. Each insult, each comment about his supposed lack of discipline weighed on him like a physical burden. His patience wore thin, and the exhaustion of holding everything in was starting to take its toll. Then, during one particularly grueling practice, Coach Harris took things even further. "All right, everyone," he announced, gathering the team around him. "We're not just here to play basketball, we're here to represent this school, and that means looking professional, acting professional. I don't want to see any distractions, especially not those braids." His words sliced through the air like a blade. Then he turned to Jamal, his eyes cold and hard. "Next practice, you come with your hair in check or don't come at all." Jamal felt a surge of anger rise in his chest, raw and hot. His body tensed as his fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, to tell Coach Harris that his hair had nothing to do with his ability to play. But before he could even form the words, Coach shot him a withering glare. "Did I make myself clear?" Jamal swallowed the words that had been on the tip of his tongue. He nodded, feeling the weight of defeat settle over him. As he left the gym, his mind swirled with frustration, resentment, and a deep sense of betrayal. This wasn't just about basketball anymore. This was about who he was, his identity, his pride. And for the first time, he realized he might have to choose between the game he loved and staying true to himself. That night, he tossed and turned in bed, his mind a storm of anger and confusion. Coach Harris's words echoed relentlessly. "Next practice, you come with your hair in check, or don't come at all." The ultimatum weighed heavily on him. Basketball was supposed to be his escape, the one place where he could truly feel like himself. But now he was being forced to choose between the sport he loved and the identity he held dear. Every time he imagined showing up to practice with his braids gone, a wave of resentment surged through him. His braids weren't just a hairstyle, they were a connection to his culture, his roots, and his family, especially his father. Cutting them off felt like cutting off a part of himself. By morning, Jamal had made his decision. He would not let Coach Harris force him into abandoning who he was. His mother's words replayed in his mind. "Be who you are, Jamal. Those who matter will see you for who you are inside." He steeled himself, choosing to keep his braids. If Coach Harris had a problem with it, Jamal would deal with that when the time came. When he arrived at practice, his pulse quickened. His palms were damp with anxiety. As he stepped into the gym, he felt every pair of eyes turned to him. His teammates watched in silence, their gazes flicking between him and Coach Harris, as if they could sense the tension simmering in the air. Coach Harris was already there, clipboard in hand, but the moment he saw Jamal, his expression soured. His jaw tightened, and he set the clipboard down with a deliberate, ominous calm. Jamal's heart pounded, but he forced himself to stand tall, keeping his gaze steady. "Jamal," Coach Harris said, his voice low but dripping with disdain. "Didn't I make myself clear?" "Yes, Coach," Jamal replied, his voice steady, though he could feel his stomach twisting. "But I'm not going to change who I am for practice. My hair doesn't affect how I play." The room went silent. The other players froze, their eyes wide. No one had ever dared to speak back to Coach Harris like that. The coach's face flushed with anger, his eyes narrowing as he took a step closer, towering over Jamal. "You think you're above the rules, huh? You think you're some kind of exception?" His voice rose, echoing through the gym. "I've seen your type before. Thinking you can do whatever you want and get away with it." Jamal's fists clenched at his sides. The unfairness of the accusation sparked an anger he could barely contain. "I'm not trying to be an exception," he replied, his voice tight. "I'm just trying to be myself." Coach Harris sneered. "Yourself? I don't care who you think you are. In my gym, you follow my rules." Without another word, he reached out his hand, closing it around one of Jamal's braids. Jamal's heart dropped. Before he could react, Coach Harris pulled out a small pair of scissors from his pocket, an almost predatory gleam in his eyes. In one swift, brutal motion, he cut through the braid. The severed hair fell to the floor. A collective gasp rippled through the gym. Jamal stood frozen in shock, his breath caught in his throat. He felt like the air had been punched from his lungs. Before he could even process what had happened, Coach Harris moved to the next braid, his hand moving with cold, calculated precision. "Stop!" Jamal shouted, jerking back, but Coach Harris gripped his shoulder firmly, holding him in place. "You'll thank me for this one day," the coach muttered, almost to himself. "One day you'll understand the importance of discipline, the importance of not standing out." Jamal's vision blurred. His cheeks burned with shame. Each braid that fell to the ground felt like a part of him being stripped away, a painful, humiliating reminder of his powerlessness in that moment. He clenched his jaw, his entire body shaking, but he refused to let Coach Harris see him cry. When the last braid was severed, the coach stepped back, inspecting Jamal with smug satisfaction. "There. Now you look like you belong," he said loudly, making sure everyone heard. "Maybe now you'll focus on your game instead of getting attention." The gym remained silent. Jamal turned, his legs feeling weak beneath him, and ran out of the gym. He didn't know where he was going, he just needed to get away. Away from the stares, away from the whispers, away from the suffocating humiliation. As he burst through the school doors and into the open air, he gasped for breath, his chest heaving. Tears streamed down his face, his hair, his pride, his sense of self. It had all been taken from him in front of everyone. And at that moment, he knew that this was far from over. Jamal sat frozen in shock as a wave of humiliation, rage, and disbelief crashed over him, his entire body locked up as Coach Harris moved to the next braid, completely ignoring Jamal's stunned expression. His hands worked with cold, calculated precision, each snip of the scissors cutting deeper than just hair. It cut into Jamal's sense of self. "Stop!" Jamal shouted, jerking away. But Coach Harris's grip on his shoulder was firm, holding him in place. "You'll thank me for this one day," the coach muttered, almost to himself. "One day you'll understand the importance of discipline, the importance of not standing out." Jamal's vision blurred, his cheeks burning with shame. He watched in helpless horror as each braid fell to the gym floor, a painful, physical symbol of his powerlessness. His voice failed him, and though the sting of tears burned behind his eyes, he fought to hold them back. He refused to let Coach Harris see him cry. When the last braid was severed, the coach stepped back, looking at Jamal with smug satisfaction. "There, now you look like you belong," he said loudly, making sure the entire gym heard. "Maybe now you'll focus on your game instead of getting attention." Jamal couldn't take it any longer. He turned on his heel and ran from the gym, ignoring the stunned expressions of his teammates and the whispers that followed him. He didn't care where he was going. He just knew he had to get away. Away from the gym, away from Coach Harris, away from Coach Harris. He sprinted through the school hallways, shoving past students who barely had time to react. He burst through the main doors and didn't stop running until he reached the back of the building. There, he finally collapsed onto a bench, gasping for breath. His body shook, and for the first time he let the tears fall freely. The humiliation, the anger, the utter betrayal. It was too much. Jamal. He looked up through blurred vision to see Leah and Carl rushing toward him, their faces etched with worry. Leah was the first to reach him, sitting beside him and placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice gentle but full of concern. "We saw what happened. That was so wrong. He can't do that." Jamal wiped his face with the back of his sleeve, but his voice still broke when he tried to speak. I didn't think he'd actually do it." Carl clenched his fists, his jaw tight with fury. "He's a monster. There's no way he should get away with this." Jamal looked down at the ground, his humiliation and helplessness pressing down on him like a physical weight. He felt so small, so powerless. "But what can I do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's the coach. I'm just a student." Leah's eyes blazed with anger. "No, Jamal. This isn't just about basketball anymore. What he did was wrong, and he needs to be held accountable. We can't let him get away with this." Jamal wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that there was something he could do, that someone would listen. But the thought of standing up to Coach Harris still filled him with dread. "Even if I tried to tell someone," he said, shaking his head, "who's going to believe me over him? Everyone respects Coach Harris. They'll just say I'm exaggerating or trying to cause trouble." Carl shook his head firmly. "Not if we all stand together. There were other students there. They saw what he did, and we're here for you, Jamal. You don't have to face this alone." Jamal looked up at his friends, a flicker of hope stirring within him. Their support meant everything, but fear still gnawed at him. Leah squeezed his shoulder gently. "You're stronger than he thinks, Jamal. Don't let him take that away from you." Jamal inhaled deeply, his mind racing. If he didn't speak out, Coach Harris would keep doing this to others. He would keep bullying, keep controlling, keep tearing kids down. That night, Jamal lay awake in bed, his emotions in turmoil. His mind swirled with anger, shame, and exhaustion. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop replaying the moment in the gym. How powerless he had felt, how the scissors had snipped away not just his hair, but a piece of his dignity. He clenched his jaw. No, he wouldn't let Coach Harris win. He had spent too much time staying silent, hoping things would change on their own. They wouldn't, not unless he did something about it. With newfound determination, Jamal reached for his phone. His fingers trembled slightly as he typed a message. "Dad, I need to tell you something." Jamal sat in a haze of bitterness and helplessness, still feeling the sharp, humiliating snips as Coach Harris severed his braids. Each cut had felt like a personal attack, a forced attempt to erase a piece of his identity. He hadn't told his mother what had happened, too numb and exhausted to even find the words. But when morning came, he knew he couldn't keep this to himself any longer. After a restless night, Jamal made a decision. He needed to call his father. His dad, a fierce advocate for minority rights and a well-known community figure back in their old city, had always taught him the importance of standing up against injustice. Though Jamal had been trying to fit in quietly, the humiliation from Coach Harris made him realize that staying silent wasn't an option anymore. Jamal sat on the edge of his bed, phone pressed to his ear, waiting anxiously for his dad to pick up. The moment he heard his father's warm and reassuring voice, emotions flooded through him. "Hey Jamal, how's my boy doing?" his dad asked, his tone filled with the usual cheer, completely unaware of the turmoil in Jamal's heart. Jamal took a shaky breath. "Dad, I need to tell you something." He recounted everything: Coach Harris's taunts, the judgmental looks, the constant criticism, and finally the horror of having his braids cut in front of the entire team. His voice shook as he relived the memory, and he could hear the growing silence on the other end of the call. The silence felt heavy, almost suffocating. When Jamal finally finished, his father's voice came through, low and simmering with barely contained anger. "Oh, did what?" Jamal swallowed, feeling both relieved and apprehensive at his father's reaction. "He said my hair was a distraction and I had to get rid of it to be professional. He cut it himself, right there, in front of everyone." There was a long pause. Then his father spoke, his voice steady but filled with an undeniable fire. "Hey Jamal, listen to me, this is not okay. No one has the right to make you feel less than you are because of your culture, your identity. I am not going to let this go." By the time Jamal got off the phone, his father had already promised to take immediate action. Jamal wasn't sure what that would entail, but the thought of his dad stepping in gave him a flicker of hope. Maybe with his dad's influence, something would finally change. That same afternoon, his father made a call to the school principal, demanding a meeting with the administration. The principal, at first dismissive, quickly grew uneasy as Jamal's father made it clear that this was no ordinary complaint. He emphasized the cultural and racial implications of Coach Harris's actions, underscoring that this was a clear violation of Jamal's rights and an assault on his dignity. The principal, sensing the gravity of the situation, agreed to set up a meeting with the school board. But Jamal's father wasn't content with a closed-door discussion. He wanted the story to reach people. That evening, he contacted several local news outlets, detailing what had happened to his son. Within hours, the story began to spread. Outrage poured in from community members who were appalled by Coach Harris's actions. Meanwhile, Jamal's friends Leah and Carl knew they had to take a stand. They gathered a group of students and shared Jamal's story, rallying support. Leah, with her fierce determination, led the effort, convincing students to join a protest in solidarity with Jamal. The next morning, students arrived at school in droves. Many of them wore hairstyles that celebrated diversity, some with braids, some with afros, others with traditional head wraps. The halls buzzed with energy, students exchanging nods and words of encouragement. Jamal felt a lump rise in his throat when he stepped onto campus and saw Leah and Carl waiting for him outside his homeroom. Their faces were filled with purpose and determination. "This is your fight, Jamal," Leah said, standing by his side, "but we're fighting with you." As Jamal looked around, seeing the wave of support surrounding him, he realized something. He wasn't alone. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was bigger. This was about all of them. And for the first time since that awful day in the gym, Jamal felt something other than anger and shame. He felt hope, room. Their expressions were serious but encouraging. "Today, we're going to show them that they can't silence us," Leah said firmly, giving Jamal a reassuring smile. As they walked through the hallways together, Jamal noticed more students nodding in solidarity. Their faces reflected a mix of defiance and support. The school administration quickly took notice of the protest, but the students remained undeterred. By lunchtime, a crowd had gathered in the school courtyard, holding signs with messages like, "Respect our identity and our hair, our culture." The principal emerged, his face tight with frustration as he tried to contain the situation. He demanded that the students disperse, but Leah stepped forward, her voice strong and unwavering. "We're here to support Jamal," she declared, looking directly at the principal. "What happened to him was wrong, and we won't let it go unnoticed." The principal hesitated, visibly taken aback by Leah's boldness. Jamal felt a swell of pride as he stood beside her, the voices of his peers chanting in unison behind them. The protest continued, drawing attention not only from the school, but also from parents, local reporters, and even activists who had caught wind of the story. In the afternoon, Jamal's father arrived at the school. He strode into the principal's office, joined by a lawyer and a representative from a local civil rights organization. The principal, clearly overwhelmed, attempted to smooth things over, but Jamal's father was relentless. He demanded a formal investigation into Coach Harris's conduct and a public apology to Jamal. He emphasized that this wasn't just about a haircut. This was about the right to cultural identity and the importance of respecting diversity in educational institutions. As the meeting went on, Jamal's father presented the facts clearly and forcefully, outlining the emotional impact the incident had on his son and the blatant disregard Coach Harris had shown for Jamal's rights. The school administration, realizing the severity of the situation and the public attention it had garnered, began to backpedal, promising to investigate and take appropriate action. Meanwhile, outside, the protest grew louder. Students shared stories of their own experiences with prejudice, their voices blending into a chorus of shared frustration and resilience. Jamal stood among them, feeling a sense of unity and strength he hadn't felt before. For the first time, he realized he wasn't facing this alone. By the end of the day, the principal emerged to address the crowd. He announced that the school would conduct a formal investigation into the incident and that Coach Harris had been temporarily suspended pending the outcome. Though it wasn't a complete victory, it was a significant step forward, a sign that their voices had been heard. Jamal's heart swelled with gratitude as he looked around at his friends, his peers, and even strangers who had come to stand by him. Leah and Carl stood by his side, their expressions filled with pride and relief. "We did it," Leah whispered, smiling through tears. Jamal nodded, his own eyes glistening. The fight wasn't over yet, but for the first time since he'd come to this school, he felt like he belonged. The journey had been painful, but now, with the support of his friends, family, and community, he was ready to face whatever came next. The days following the protest were a whirlwind for Jamal. The story of what had happened to him continued to spread, drawing attention not only from local media but also from activists, community leaders, and concerned parents who were appalled by Coach Harris's actions. For the first time since arriving in this town, Jamal felt like he was no longer standing alone. Even though the journey had been painful and humiliating, the school administration was not handling the backlash as gracefully as Jamal's father had hoped. The principal had initially promised an investigation, but days passed without any real response from the school. Students whispered about the administration's reluctance, and many suspected they were waiting for the story to fade from the headlines. But Jamal, his father, and the supportive community wouldn't allow that to happen. On the third day after the protest, Jamal's father decided to take further action. He reached out to civil rights organizations and local government representatives, making it clear that this was no longer just about his son, it was about ensuring that no other child would have to endure the same injustice. Indignity. That evening, Jamal's father organized a public town hall meeting. Dozens of people turned up, including teachers, parents, community members, and even some students from Jamal's school. Jamal sat beside his father on the stage, feeling both nervous and empowered as he looked out at the crowd. His dad took the microphone, his voice steady and commanding. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his gaze sweeping over the faces in the room. "My son Jamal came to this town hoping to find a welcoming community. Instead, he found a place where his identity was dismissed, where his heritage was disrespected, and where he was forced to question his right to simply be who he is." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience as Jamal's father continued, recounting the events that had led to this moment. He spoke passionately about the importance of cultural respect and how a child's self-worth should never be compromised by the biases of others. "We are here not only to seek justice for Jamal," he said, his voice filled with conviction, "but to demand that our schools uphold values of inclusion and respect. No child should ever be humiliated, should ever be made to feel less than because of who they are." When he finished, the room erupted in applause. One by one, others came forward to speak, sharing stories of their own experiences with discrimination, both in the school and beyond. Teachers, parents, and even former students spoke up, recounting moments when they too had felt the sting of prejudice. As the town hall meeting came to a close, a woman from a prominent civil rights organization approached Jamal's father. She expressed her support and offered to assist with legal representation if the school failed to take appropriate action. Her involvement added further pressure on the school, signaling that this situation was now in the public eye. The following day, the school finally made a move. The principal called Jamal's father to inform him that Coach Harris had been placed on administrative leave pending a formal investigation. While this wasn't the final step Jamal and his father had hoped for, it was a sign that their voices were being heard. News of the suspension spread quickly, and Jamal's classmates greeted him with encouragement and words of support. Leah and Carl, as always, were by his side. "This is just the beginning, Jamal," Leah said with a determined smile. "We won't stop until they make real changes." With Coach Harris suspended, the atmosphere at school began to shift. Teachers and staff who had previously been distant or dismissive started approaching Jamal, offering words of apology or support. However, Jamal sensed that many of them were simply afraid of the public backlash. Despite the school's attempts to smooth things over, he knew that the fight wasn't over yet. He and his friends remained vigilant, ready to keep pushing for true change. That weekend, Jamal's father organized another meeting with the school administration. This time, he brought a lawyer from the civil rights organization, along with a community representative who had taken an interest in the case. Together, they presented a list of demands to the school board. 1. A formal public apology to Jamal for the actions of Coach Harris. 2. Mandatory diversity and cultural awareness training for all school staff to prevent future incidents of discrimination. 3. Policy changes within the school, including a commitment to respect cultural and ethnic expressions among students. 4. Assurance of protection for students who choose to express their heritage and identity. The school board faced mounting pressure, and for the first time they realized this issue wouldn't simply go away. Mounting public pressure and the risk of legal action, the school was forced to take these demands seriously. The principal, visibly uncomfortable, promised to review the proposed policies with the board, though it was clear he hoped to resolve things quietly. Despite the progress, Jamal and his friends knew that a single suspension wouldn't bring about the lasting change they wanted. Leah, Carl, and other students took action, organizing a petition to push for real policy changes. They gathered signatures from classmates, teachers, and even members of the community, urging the school to implement reforms as quickly as possible. One afternoon, Leah and Carl approached Jamal, their eyes shining with determination. "We've got over 100 signatures already," Leah said proudly. "Everyone's on board with this. They want to see real change." Jamal looked at the list of names, feeling a swell of pride and gratitude. It was overwhelming to see how many people supported him, how many believed in the importance of this fight. His friends had gone above and beyond, transforming his personal struggle into a movement that resonated with so many. In the days that followed, the story continued to gain traction. News outlets picked it up with headlines reading, "Student Fights for Cultural Identity in School Discrimination Case," and "Community Demands Accountability After Incident of Racial Bias." Social media was flooded with messages of support from people all over the region. The outpouring of encouragement fueled Jamal, giving him the strength to keep pushing forward. Finally, after weeks of mounting pressure, the school board made an announcement. In a public statement, they acknowledged the need for greater awareness and sensitivity regarding cultural expression within the school. They committed to implementing the proposed diversity and cultural awareness training for all staff and promised to revise the school's policies to better protect students' rights to express their heritage. Jamal and his father attended the announcement, standing among reporters, students, and community members as the principal and school board members spoke. Though Jamal still harbored resentment for the humiliation he had endured, he felt a glimmer of hope. The school was finally taking responsibility. While it didn't erase the pain of what had happened, it felt like a step towards something better. After the announcement, Jamal's father placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, a proud smile on his face. "You did this, Jamal," he said. "You stood up, and because of that, things are going to change." Jamal nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. He knew that this journey had been about more than just standing up for himself. It had been about paving the way for others, ensuring that no one else would have to endure what he had. As they left the meeting, Leah and Carl ran over to join him, their faces lit up with excitement. "This is it, Jamal," Carl said. "We really made a difference." Leah nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "You showed them that we're stronger together, that we won't stay silent." Jamal smiled, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt since he arrived at this school. The fight had been difficult, but he knew they had achieved something meaningful. They had transformed a moment of pain into a movement of empowerment. Thanks to their efforts, the school was on a path toward real, lasting change. The following school year began with a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. As students filtered into the building, a new banner hung above the entrance. "Respect, diversity, and inclusion, core values of our school." The message was clear. Jamal's story had left an indelible mark, and the administration was making a visible commitment to change. Jamal walked into school on that first day, a mix of emotions swirling within him. It had been a long, difficult year, but he felt stronger and more confident now, not just because of the policy changes, but because he knew he had made a real difference. His struggle had sparked a movement, and that, more than anything, gave him hope for the future, of standing up for oneself. He poured his heart into the essay, capturing every detail, every lesson he had learned. When he finished, his teacher was so moved by the essay that she submitted it to the school newspaper. Soon, it was printed for the entire school to read, sparking conversations among students and teachers alike. His words touched people in ways he hadn't anticipated, becoming a source of inspiration for others. One afternoon, as he walked down the hall, a younger student approached him, clutching a copy of the school newspaper. She had braids similar to his and looked up at him with wide, admiring eyes. "Jamal," she said shyly, "your story really helped me. I used to think I had to change myself to fit in, but now I know I don't have to. Thank you." Jamal smiled warmly, feeling a deep sense of pride. He realized that what had happened to him was bigger than just one moment of injustice. It was about changing the culture of the school, making it a place where everyone felt they belonged. As the weeks passed, he continued to see the impact of the school's new policies. Students embraced their identities more freely, and the school administration made a noticeable effort to ensure a more inclusive environment. Teachers encouraged open discussions about diversity, and the cultural awareness elective became one of the most popular courses. Leah and Carl, now recognized as leaders in the peer support group, worked alongside Jamal to ensure that no student felt isolated because of their background. Together, they built a space where students could share their experiences and find encouragement. One afternoon, as Jamal worked on an assignment in the library, the school principal approached him. Jamal looked up, surprised to see an unexpected expression of respect on the principal's face. "Jamal," the principal began, his voice a bit hesitant, "I wanted to thank you. I know things could have been handled differently, and I realize now that we could have done more to support you. The changes we've made wouldn't have happened if not for your bravery." Jamal nodded, unsure of what to say. It felt strange to hear gratitude from someone who had once seemed indifferent to his struggle. But he accepted it with grace, understanding that real change often came from difficult journeys. As the semester continued, Jamal saw the effects of the new policies in action. Students felt more comfortable expressing themselves, and he noticed an increase in diversity in hairstyles, clothing, and traditions among his classmates. There was a newfound sense of pride in the school, a shift in how students treated each other. One day, Jamal was invited to speak in the new cultural diversity course. Standing in front of the class, he felt a rush of nerves but also a deep sense of purpose. He shared his story, talking about the importance of respecting each other's backgrounds, the pain of facing discrimination, and the strength it took to stand up for oneself. After he finished, the students applauded. A few came up to him afterward, thanking him for his words. One student, a boy who had been quiet the entire time, approached him with a sincere look. "I used to think that staying silent was the easiest way to deal with things," the boy admitted. "But after hearing your story, I think I want to start speaking up too." Jamal's heart swelled with gratitude. At that moment, he knew that everything he had gone through, every tear, every moment of frustration, had been worth it. His journey had inspired others to stand up for themselves, to embrace their heritage without fear or shame. As the year drew to a close, Jamal reflected on how far he had come. The challenges he had faced had transformed him, giving him a strength he hadn't known he possessed. He felt more grounded, more confident, and ready to face whatever lay ahead. One day, his teacher assigned an essay on personal growth. Jamal sat down with a sense of purpose, determined to share his story in his own words. He wrote about his experiences, the pain, the resilience, the importance of identity, and the power of standing up for oneself. His teacher, deeply moved, encouraged him to submit it beyond the school newspaper. It was later published in a local youth magazine, reaching even more people beyond his school. On the last day of school, as he walked through the now familiar hallways, Jamal noticed something new. Students gathered in the courtyard, talking and laughing, their diverse styles and backgrounds blending together in a vibrant tapestry. It was a small but powerful reminder of the progress they had made, of the community they had built. As he turned to leave, Leah and Carl ran up to him, their faces bright with excitement. "Jamal," Leah grinned, "we wanted to tell you, next year they're naming the diversity course after you, the Jamal Initiative for Cultural Awareness. It's their way of honoring everything you've done." Jamal's heart swelled with pride. He looked around at his friends, his school, the place that had once made him feel like an outsider, but had now become a part of his journey. He knew that his story had left a lasting impact, and he felt ready to face whatever came next with strength, resilience, and an unwavering sense of self. As he stepped forward into his future, he knew he would carry his story, his heritage, and his pride with him wherever he went. Jamal poured his heart into the essay, capturing every detail and lesson he had learned. When he finished, his teacher was so moved by his words that she submitted it to the school newspaper. Soon it was printed for the entire school to read, sparking conversations among students and teachers alike. His story touched people in ways he hadn't expected, becoming a source of inspiration. In the final weeks of the school year, Jamal realized how much he had changed, not just within the walls of the school, but also in his own mind. He felt stronger, more confident, and more connected to the people around him. As he prepared for the next chapter of his life, he knew that the lessons he had learned would stay with him no matter where he went. On the last day of school, as he walked through the now familiar halls, Jamal noticed something different. Students were gathered in the courtyard, talking and laughing, their diverse styles and backgrounds blending together in a beautiful, vibrant way. It was a small but powerful reminder of the progress they had made and the community they had built. As he turned to leave, Leah and Carl ran up to him, their faces glowing with excitement. "Jamal," Leah called, grinning, "we wanted to tell you, next year they're naming the diversity course after you, the Jamal Initiative for Cultural Awareness. It's their way of honoring everything you've done." Jamal's heart swelled with pride and gratitude. He looked around at his friends and his school, the place that had once made him feel like an outsider, but had now become a part of his journey. He knew that his story had left a lasting impact. As he stepped forward into whatever came next, he felt ready. With strength, resilience, and an unwavering sense of self, he knew that the struggle had been worth it. He had made a difference. Jamal smiled, knowing that he would continue to carry his story, his heritage, and his pride with him wherever he went. Jamal's journey teaches a powerful lesson about resilience, identity, and the importance of standing up for what is right. No one should ever feel forced to change who they are to fit in or be accepted. His experience reminds us that discrimination, whether subtle or blatant, must be confronted, and silence only allows injustice to continue. When faced with adversity, Jamal found strength in his family, friends, and community, proving that support and unity can create meaningful change. His story highlights the importance of speaking up, even when it's difficult, and shows that one person's courage can inspire others to stand together. Schools should be places of acceptance where students feel safe to express their identities without fear of humiliation. Jamal's perseverance led to real reform, ensuring that future students would not face the same injustice. His story is a testament to the power of self-respect, advocacy, and the unwavering fight for equality. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. Leave a comment to let us know where you're watching from, and check out the next video on the channel.